we speak the same language and in very different voices. I really love that about you because
Mhm.
we both talk a lot about changing generational patterns. And
Yes.
like for me, I had a very clear generational pattern that I wanted to break. I had I got spanked when I was a kid. I got yelled at and scared me. And I've forgiven my parents and all of that. All that work is under the table now. But I'm just curious about, for me, I came out with my 2-year-old, like, I was yelling at her and I was scaring her, and I was so disappointed in
Mhm.
myself, and I know you work with parents, you work with teachers, you don't have any kids yourself, but you're working with parents and teachers to help break these generational cycles. Is it really personal work for you in the same way that it was for me, like, from your own family?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, we all have our upbringing and all in our experiences, and most of us grew up getting, spanked and yelled at, and yeah, that's all a part of my story too, as is a lot of people's story. But it really didn't. Where a lot of my work is inspired by my work working with children, right? And when I first started to work with children as a Montessori teacher in a classroom of 30 children, um, I really, quite honestly, had no idea what I was doing. I just got a job because I needed a job. And, I knew that I was good with kids, but I really needed a job. And that's really what it was about. And once I got the job, they gave me a little 3-day training of just like, hey, like part of it is about HR policies and background and paperwork and all that stuff, and a little bit of training about like what to actually do in the classroom. And I still remember that they put a VCR in for my training, and this was a big part of my training. It was a VCR of video of play, like a video about play. But that's how old it was, and that's how dated like the orientation was, and that should give you some kind of clue of how ill prepared I was to go into this classroom and try to help with all these different emotions. And anyone who has, like I talk to parents, like when I had 2 children and 3 children, like it's just the emotions, like everything is just like multiplied. And thinking about a classroom with 30 children of just all these different emotions, all these different personalities, people, upbringing. It was something I was not prepared to handle, to really to help with. And I struggled a lot with that because I understood the gravity of what I was doing, of being a part of growing the next generation of humans, right? But I didn't really know how to do that in a helpful way, in a good way. And I'd go in these situations of like conflict, and I would come out of it and like try to help them with their problems. But by the end of it, like maybe they're yelling at each other and now they're hitting each other. And like that didn't work. Like, what am
Oh,
I doing?
no.
Like, and a lot of it, when you first start off, you try to like focus like logic is like the first thing you go to, right? You try to like, I'm logically explaining what they should be doing and what should be happening, but it's not working, right? And so I fell in all the, traps that like most people do when they're trying to, whether you're becoming a teacher for the first time or a parent for the first time, a caregiver in general. I would say this does not only span a lot of what I talk about doesn't just apply to parenting, doesn't just apply to teaching, it applies to leadership too, and it applies to how we engage in relationships in our lives.
Definitely.
But back to the story of just how this kind of became really, personal, how this all came about. I remember um, struggling, so like the visceral feeling like in my body of struggling, of like going on break and like literally not, like I don't have the strength to like to to go back in there and to try to help. And like I was overwhelmed, I was stressed.
Mm,
And a big part of it is I just didn't understand what was happening, and I didn't have the tools.
yeah.
And I knew that it's still like I went searching, right? And I think this is a moment that a lot of people have, like, this isn't working, the breakdown comes before, the
The
progress is
breakthrough.
the
Breakdown
breakthrough,
before
right?
the
That was the word.
breakthrough.
That's
Yeah,
what I was looking
yeah,
for. The breakdown
yeah.
comes before the breakthrough,
Yeah.
right? And before I get back to the story, anyone who just heard that, when you do break down, or you do feel like you're having a breakdown, or maybe you're in that spot right now, like that can be for so many people, for myself included, as I'm telling the story, for hundreds of thousands of people I've talked to, like that's the pivotal moment. That breakdown, like that's the pivotal moment. That's when there's an opportunity for everything to change, right? For you to completely shift directions. So breakdown was happening, and like I need answers. Like there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to do this. There's got to be more than this like VCR 1962 play video that I watched, right? There's got to be more to this. So over time, and luckily for me, like I had a leader who really believed in me, and I was in a company that really did a lot of training. So they sent me to trainings. I was, reading books on my own, listening to podcasts, constantly trying things and reflecting. Like my reflection process is intense, like to the point where one of my bosses created a verb for what I would do at the end of the day. And she was like, "Oh, are you chazzing me?" And what that meant was, at the end of the day, like, are we about to have a long conversation about like a reflective conversation about what happened and why it happened, what to do differently. But this is the process of learning and growing and improving. And so over time, like I did that, I improved, and to the point where I started to feel more confident. People started to ask me for advice, and I still didn't see myself as like a mentor or someone who could help other people, but other people started to notice my growth, and they started to ask like, "Oh, how can you help me? Can you help me with this?" And I remember it was kind of another light bulb moment for me, was someone kind of just casually asking, "Hey, like I'm really struggling with this child in this situation, can you help?" I offered some advice kind of casually, what felt casually to me, and they came back and it was just like, my whole day has changed. It changed the child's day, it changed my day. I need more of that. And that's when I'm like, man, yeah, so I'm growing this next generation of humans, and I love the impact that I'm making with my community of humans. But if I can impact teachers, my impact can be exponential. And so I became an educational specialist, and that was pretty much my role. And I worked with 8 to 10 different schools, kind of depending on the time, in a larger company of about 60 or 70 different schools. So there were times where I worked with the other schools, but my focus was like the 8, 10 different schools in my district, so to speak, right? That really was like a dream job. People ask, "Oh, what's your dream job?" I'm like, this is my dream job. I know like people don't see early childhood as something like as like a career, but like that is like, feel so fulfilled by what I'm doing, and I'm making impact, and I'm growing, I'm learning, I'm getting it, I'm growing as a person. Like, this is, what else could I ask for? Pandemic happened. Children, sorry to smack the mic. Children went home, parents went home, or parents were already home. They went home to their parents, teachers went home, right? And I saw, through conversations I was having with parents, and through just social media, really saw how parents were struggling during that time, and just observing and listening to parents. It was kind of one of those moments, another one of those light bulb moments, where I felt in my journey of learning and struggling and feeling like I'm ruining children, and like I've learned so much on my journey. And if I could share that, then if I could share that, my experience, my journey, and my growth, that I knew that would help so many people with their struggles. Because again, I know what it's like there's got to be an answer to this. Like there's got to be a better way, like, but I don't know it. And it's really frustrating. And in the meantime, like I am ruining this child, this human being in front of me. And that is a heavy feeling. Even as a teacher, that is a heavy feeling. And a big part of kind of where the content kind of grew into, of just like, and sharing my journey, and sharing, it's just that a big part of where our challenges is that we're just repeating unconsciously, or sometimes consciously, but more times than not unconsciously, repeating unhealthy habits of behavior that we learned from, you know, our adults when we were young, and that have been conditioned into us. And a lot of times we don't even know. And, you know, a lot of us like, oh, I didn't realize I had all this stuff to work through until I became a parent, right?
Oh yeah.
And then my, you know, my child made me realize like, oh, actually I thought I worked on that. Like I thought I worked on that before, but clearly I still have more work to do. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
those we tend to pass on those generational patterns unconsciously. And a big part of what I do in my content is helping us see what those cycles are, right? And not just doing it because it was the way that we were raised, but actually being conscious of, okay, that was the way that I was raised. I felt some way about it, but let me be conscious about like what I'm saying and what I'm doing and how it's impacting the other person, right? And you know, like I was actually just talking about this, and I'll wrap up here with this thought, so we can kind of go back and forth. But someone asked me, like, which one of like the labels do you identify with the most? Like gentle parenting or peaceful parenting or respectful parenting. And I would say like the big thing, and I kind of thought I was reflective on this question, that conscious parenting feels most accurate. Conscious discipline, conscious parenting, but the descriptor is conscious, being conscious of what we're doing, right? And I think that is what I'd say is the most accurate label. I'm not a big fan of labels, but we're going to label it. I'd say that's the most accurate label for what we're all kind of talking about and doing, right? Because even like gentle parent, like people's idea of what gentle is, right? Like some people would feel when you're holding a boundary and you feel really overwhelmed, it doesn't feel like, you may not describe yourself as like gentle, right? No. That's not a gentle feeling that you're having, right? But it's essential and gentle and respectful, whatever, like holding boundaries is a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
But some people will hear gentle parenting and will
assuming there's no boundaries. Yeah.
Right. Oh, you're just, you know, and maybe because it's like the action of like, maybe even the same thing for, you know, being a peaceful parent, right? Like, well, maybe sometimes I don't want to be peaceful. Maybe there's a time. And if we just say, hey, instead of like, be gentle, be peaceful, be respectful, instead, like, let's try to be conscious. Let's try to be aware. And then we can make the choices based on our awareness. I think that may be a message that's more digestible. Well,
it just makes more sense. I mean, it's like, I mean, that's what like mindfulness is about, is like, let's be aware. Let's not just like like reflexively do these same things. Like, let's make a conscious choice, right? Let's actually make a choice. And that requires us to look at research, look at what really does work, look at what really doesn't work. What are the effects of the ways that we parented, you know, our parents parented in the past? Is that really effective? Even if you turned out okay, is it really effective, right? Like, and instead, can we like look at and be aware of what is actually effective? And I think that that's what you're pointing to, right? Is like, let's just like open our eyes a little bit more and not just say, I mean, that's the thing about parenting, is like we go into it and we say, you know, we get training to drive a car, training to teach in a Montessori classroom, training to be a barista at Starbucks. And then we go into parenting and we're like, we're just gonna wing it and do whatever our parents did. And then we end up repeating.
Figure it out. It's all natural, right?
It's all instinctual. Yeah. And then we repeat those patterns. So what are the things that aren't effective that we don't want to repeat? Like, what are some of the things that parents habitually do? And I'm really interested also in kind of you speaking to this too, because, you know, you're like a Black man, I'm a white woman, and a lot of times like the dads in mindful parenting have a hard time hearing the message that we both speak to in our own different voices, from, you know, a woman, right, who may have a certain perspective, and so I'm always really eager to talk to men because men in general in our culture are like taught to be put in a little box, right, about feelings, to put in that little man box, about, and to kind of be tough, and and you don't have a lot of feelings, and there's like a kind of a there are it's a little bit stereotypical, but it's there because it's still pretty common that a lot of dads are very interested in, like, let's get those timeouts and punishments and hold these kind of things. So I- and I'm interested to kind of hear from your voice about this, so that maybe it'll be a voice that some people will hear that might have been just harder to hear,
Yeah.
from my voice or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The first thing I want to say, we asked this like when like in this conversation, like, oh, like what are the things, what are the unhealthy patterns? First thing I want to say here is that that's where everyone starts off, but we can't stay there. Like,
Yeah.
like when people start on their journey, it's like, I don't want to do the things, like you come to the realization of like, I don't want to do the thing that I don't want to be my parents. I don't want to raise my kids that way. But we can't stay there, because if you focus on what you don't want, you're going to get more of that. You want to focus on what you do want. And so you want to create a vision, values around, a culture around what you do want, like who, like the person, the parent that you do want to be, and be very clear about that within yourself and with the people you're caring for, the people in your family. That's the first thing I want to say. Now, in terms of before actually saying like what unhealthy and giving examples of unhealthy habits, in terms of like men and women kind of having a different perspective, I actually want to tease into why I think that is and why traditionally where that comes from, kind of talking about these generational cycles, right? Because it didn't just happen like in this generation or even the generation before us, where like all of a sudden men decided like, okay, like we're not going to have any feelings and we're going to try to our very best to try to condition,
But
our
they're
children.
suffering from this too. I mean, they suffer from that box.
Right,
Absolutely.
100%. But like, so like think about like let's think about even like centuries ago, because generations we do have to go back that far, right? We can go back even further and talking about our brain and how we are just, the male's been meant to be the protector, right? The protector and the provider, and it makes sense. And like a primal world where you're just trying to survive, and that it would make sense to ignore your feelings, right? If there's a lion staring down at me, being sad and or disappointed or afraid and feeling my feelings in that moment probably isn't the best thing for my brain to start to do to survive, right? It's probably ignoring the feelings in the moment, maybe drawing on fear, maybe drawing on anger or fear, but ignoring like sadness to get through the moment, to push through, to survive. It makes a lot of sense, right? And it would make a lot of sense on why that kind of responsibility traditionally would fall on the male, the protector, right? The problem is that the lion is no longer staring down at us, right? And that in most of our situations, that well, one, to go back a little bit, sorry, that one, in that moment when you ignore your emotions and you stone cold ignore your emotions, you fight the lion or you flee or whatever, use whatever survival skill that you have to do it, right? Probably not feeling your feelings and or taking the perspective of the lion or anything like that. That's good for the moment. But when we have that habit over and 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 over again, and that becomes our habit, that will slowly kill us. It doesn't, if we have a short lifespan where we're only going to live to 25, 30, then it doesn't matter as much because we're not playing the long game. We're playing the short game, survive in the moment.
Long enough to reproduce. I really appreciate this like perspective because it does have benefits, right? Like there are benefits. And I think that's so cool that you brought those out.
Yeah. Now let's fast forward to, present day, where this isn't the situation typically, right? When your toddler is touching things, or when your partner does something that is triggering to you, or you're in the workplace and something doesn't go your way or something doesn't happen as you expect. You're not in that same position where the lion is going to attack you, like you're not about to die, but our brain has been wired this way. Our brain is still wired for that survival because we've been in more of a kind of a survival mode for longer than we've been in this thriving mode. So our brains are still wired that way. Just because we've changed the way that we live and we've updated our technology doesn't mean that the wiring of our brain updates along with it. We still see, when we see that the child and we feel like we feel out of control and we feel like they are disrespecting our authority, we still see it as that lion and still react as that lion, right? And instead of the healthy thing to do, the healthy habit that we want to create so we live longer, healthier, more meaningful, happier lives, is to acknowledge what we're feeling. Mm-hmm. Don't ignore the feeling. Don't unconsciously just react to the feeling. Become conscious and aware of it. Acknowledge it. Give it a word. See what story you're telling yourself about that. Breathe. Mm-hmm. Right? Go through those things, right? Maybe different situations, you're overwhelmed, cry, right? This is what our body needs to do to work through emotions. Now, what happens when we don't? And males, females, it doesn't matter, right? What happens when we don't? Just because we ignore an emotion doesn't mean it goes away. Right? It doesn't disappear. Ignoring your emotions doesn't make them disappear. They get stored in your body and they are manifested in other ways. Could be through misbehavior that you're trying to figure out, you're trying to stomp out the behavior, not realizing that there's this underlying thing that's happening and the behavior is just the symptom. They can't express how they feel. They can't express their feeling. I want the toy back. You took my toy. I'm so mad at you. They can't express that verbally. So they have to express it physically, but through hitting. Then we see the behavior like, why are you hitting? Stop hitting. There's something wrong with you. And then we try to punish or time out. But really, what would be most helpful is to teach them the skill to express how they're feeling, so they don't feel like they have to get it out with their hands, because they're trying to solve their problem. This internal conflict that they have, they're trying to solve their problem, and the skill that they have, they're using the survival skills of hitting, right? And we can teach them the skill of expressing it verbally, and that's the healthier, more pro-social way to do things. And those are the skills that we want to teach. Those are the humans that we want to raise, right? We don't want to raise humans who, when they get triggered, they're hitting people. When they get triggered, they're having a conversation, right? In a way that's not attacking the other person physically or verbally. Right, but that requires us to acknowledge our own emotions and deal with work through our own emotions, so that we just don't attack them. So what happens? Back to the question: what happens? Right, it manifests through misbehavior. It can manifest in poor gut health, manifest in a weakened immune system. The body and the brain are so connected; they talk to each other, and the body system is very much connected to our feelings, right? Our nervous system. And so when we are ignoring our feelings, as we've been conditioned this way, especially if you are a male, but also many women been conditioned the same way. It's generally in society. I think males probably get a more intense message of it, a little bit more of it, but I think we all kind of receive the message. Males maybe get a little bit more, but also look at our life expectancy for males. is not as long as females. Also, suicide rate is higher for males, right? And it's because we don't know how to express our feelings, deal with our feelings in a healthy way, because we've been conditioned to ignore them. And unless we're conscious of this, we're likely going to pass on that same pattern to our children, to whoever you're caring for, to the child you're caring for.
Yeah, because they're modeling from you. If you're acknowledging your feelings, then they're learning to do that, right? If you're stuffing it down, they're learning to do that, right? It's like we always knew, we know now that the bullies are the ones who are bullied themselves, because that's what they were doing. Their kids are terrible at doing what we say, but often great at doing what we do, right? They're great at like just modeling that. So yeah, and sometimes like it's kind of funny, I think as parents, like we get into a situation, we're so frustrated with our kids, and we like, if only you will just change your behavior, then I will be able to calm down. It's like basically the subtext of what we're saying, right? We're like, you just, and it's crazy because we're the adults. We're the ones who have the fully developed brain, right? Like it's incumbent upon us to be the adults to make that shift, but it's not easy. It's also a big ask that we're both at, like asking people to do, is to say, you have a pattern that maybe like, you may have trauma in your DNA. You may have patterns that have been going on for generations and generations and generations, and there's so much suffering. And to transform that suffering is a big ask. But I think that our kids can be a motivator to transform our own suffering, to start to develop those healthy ways of mindfully processing our feelings rather than, shoving them down or exploding in rage, right? It just shows how I think that can be an exposure to how little control we have. We think we're very strong, but it's actually a form of strength to deal with your feelings in a healthier way, to acknowledge them is an incredible form of strength.
That is strength, because it's really, a lot of times when people will describe as strength as really fragility. You're afraid of your feelings. You're afraid of dealing with disappointment and fear, or not having control, so you shove it all down, and we've kind of been taught to avoid the emotion and to be afraid. So I 100% agree with you. And on the note of if you just change your behavior, then I'll be able to change my behavior. Like, that's so true that we say all the time. And like, just thinking about like, behavior change is hard for adults and for children, right? And so like having the if we're going to have the expectation for a child to change their behavior, then why wouldn't we have the expectation for ourselves to change our behavior, knowing that the only thing we have actual control over is our own behavior, and our own behavior will influence their behavior and will impact their behavior. So instead of trying to control the things that you can't control and trying to micromanage and spend so much energy trying to control children, focus on the change that we can make, right? And if you have any doubt in your mind, if you're out there listening, you're like, yeah, I know, I try the language, I try the modeling, but like, they're not like getting it, or they're not going to get it, or I don't think they're going to get it. Like, if you don't think that modeling and modeling language is impactful, this is what we're going to do. This is what I want you to do. Okay. I'm going to play a little game. I want you just for the next week. You don't even got to do it for a long period of time. For the next week, you're a teacher listening to this, go in the classroom. If you're parent, just in your household, start dropping the F-bomb and the S-bomb and C-bomb and see what happens. I bet they're going to learn some new language, right? and we're so aware of that, right? And some people curse around the kids, some people don't, whatever. But people who are like, I really don't want children to learn curse words, and especially as a teacher, you're really hyper aware of it, because one child starts, saying a word, you're hyper aware of it. We know, like, we're afraid that they're going to use the language that we're modeling for them, but then we're skeptical that they're going to learn from hearing the language that we're modeling for them.
That's a
So
really good point, Chaz. I'm stealing that example right there. That's like a really great, that's a really great point. But so I want to get into the like point of view of like the skeptical parent here and say like, but a parent might say something like, but my child is like being disrespectful to me and they are, they're giving me the sassy no, and they're throwing their stuff in the ground and whatever, they're being disrespectful. How do you respond to that kind of situation?
the first thing, whenever we use the word like being disrespectful, we're saying that another person is being a way, and we're using it as a way to justify our actions. The first thing I invite people to reflect on is like, what is disrespect? Like, what is disrespect? And are they being disrespectful, or do you feel disrespected? Because those are two really different things. Like, we can feel like, I can feel disrespected that you didn't compliment my shirt that I'm wearing. That doesn't mean you're being disrespectful, right? And if I have a trigger that's already there, that's like because I really care about my appearance, and maybe growing up, my parents like will always get on me about like what I wear and fashion, and so maybe even in school that was a big deal, and so that's something that's really in my worldview, that's something that's really important. And if someone doesn't compliment my shirt, or someone even says something, doesn't give me a good enough compliment or makes any comment, then I can be triggered by it, right? And that's because that's my trigger. Like, this is what I want people to hear. This is the important part. When you're triggered, that's your trigger. It's not someone else's trigger. You're triggered, right? There's something in you, or there's a button that you have, and someone pushed it. Yeah, someone pushed your button, but that button is yours, right? That's your stuff that you're dealing with. So likely, often when it's like the child's being disrespected, it's really the child's triggering something within you that probably has nothing to do with the actual child, right? When we really unpack it, like we really have the conversation, it's like, we have like, okay, well, so why do we need to respond? Like, why do we need to respond harshly? Or like, why is this the response? Or why do you feel disrespect? And then it goes into the story. Then we start to hear the story, right? It's like, because they'll never learn how to, respect authorities. If they're talking back to me, then they'll never get a job, and they'll never learn to be a respectful human being. They won't be a good human. And these are the stories that we'll tell ourselves. I'm like, okay, so this is the story.
It always ends up with your child being a sociopath. All
right.
of those stories, I think,
when you pull that, yeah. Eventually, we always get there somewhere, or them not. Maybe they're a sociopath, or they'll never be successful in life, or something like that, right? And let's deal with that then. Okay, so that's the real thing that you're struggling with. That's your real fear. That's the trigger. That's the thing that they're triggering in you. Let's talk about that. Let's not only talk about that and like within your, like, unpack kind of where that's coming from in you, so you can be aware and conscious of that and realize that has actually nothing to do with your child. It has nothing to do with your 3-year-old. Actually has more to do with the way that you were raised, and your conditioning, that your mom or your dad or your grown-up had this rule, and now you feel like it's got to be a thing, but that's not necessarily true, but that's the story we're telling ourselves, right? So and then we talk about the tools that we use to help that child, because the child's being disrespectful. It's like, again, they're likely trying to get a point across. They're trying to express something that they're feeling, and maybe they didn't do it in a pro-social way, or a way they didn't do it in the best way, right? In the most respectful way. right? Which is also true for us adults too. How many times did we get like overwhelmed with emotion and we don't say things the way that we wish we would have, or the way that we would if we were completely regulated, right?
I know sometimes we have higher standards for kids than we have
Often.
for other adults. We often do, especially around like if you're asking them to do something. Good Lord. But
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't, we don't always see it that way. We're not always conscious that we have
Mhm,
the higher expectations, right?
mhm.
And so then I go into what the child, like, how can we actually help this child, right? So really it's how can we help this child express, get their point across, express what they're feeling in a better way, right? In a more respectful, more effective way. Because teaching children to advocate for themselves is really important, right? Because if you don't know how to advocate for yourself, you don't know the process, you don't know, like, you feel like it never works, like it's like you don't even know that there is a process, or you feel like you'll always be shut down, you don't know if there's a way, then you're probably going to go to the lower parts of your brain, the more using the more survival skills and the emotional part of your brain and yelling and trying to power your way into it. But if you have the process and things like to keep in mind, like of like, okay, like do some perspective taking, validate how the other person's feeling, talk about, yeah. And this is something that you're building over. This is an ongoing conversation over a long period of time, right? Obviously, your toddler is probably, they're not going to be doing a lot of perspective taking as they're trying to advocate for their needs, right? But if you can do some perspective taking and modeling that language in terms of like, I see your feeling, this is, you're wanting, then you're already building the foundation for that, right? You're already helping them learn that language so that they can use that language when they have a big emotion and they feel really strongly that they should have more screen time, right? And that doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily get the thing that they're advocating for, but you make it clear that they can advocate and there's a way to do it, and you're going to you're going to listen to them and not be dismissive, right? I'd be disrespectful too if I felt like I was trying to advocate for something and you were ignoring me, and I felt like it was really important. At some point, I'll probably get disrespectful too. So give people the skills, right? So hopefully,
Yeah.
in my consciousness, I will breathe and regulate and try to think of a different way and try to reach the other person. But that takes a lot of work, and who can blame, like, the children have to learn that, right? We
Yeah,
have to
well,
learn.
what you're describing though is that learning process. Like first we do something for our kids, right? And then we do something with our kids, and then we watch them do it, and then they do it on their own. And that takes
Yeah.
a lot of time for different skills, it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of modeling. It takes a lot of like repeating ourselves to in a skillful way for our kids to learn some skillful language, and that's
Mhm.
okay. That's normal.
Repeating ourselves in a skillful way. I like the way that you phrase that. Because a lot of times, like, we turn into robots, right? You read a script or something, and then it's like the thing you say over and over again, and like maybe it's not working. Like, yeah, it's not working because it's not authentic. You're just using that as often the kind of like an example is like, all your feelings are okay, and it's okay to feel this feeling, and yeah, and that's true, and that's like really good, and at some point, like, that's probably more for us to know, something we need to say to ourselves, because like if we're just doing like the thing when they're emotional, to try to just to get rid of the emotion and try to stop the thing, and we're like, I see you're angry, like, we're not really present in that moment, and that's not authentic, and it's patronizing, and it gets translated into just calm down, right? We're
Yeah,
using
it's like
different verbs.
emotional dishonesty, because if we're seething inside, it's like, I hear you saying.
Yeah. And they
Yeah.
know, that they know that it's not authentic, right? And they know that, like, especially you're doing it over and over, like, they're gonna learn, like, oh, this isn't something you're trying to do to, it's not all that's often our intentions are when we're trying to like validate an emotion, or even like I made a song called, like, a breathing song, And it was really helpful for a lot of people, but something that was a little like, I got to make another video about is that like, you know, people were using it, and like when their child was like upset, they would like kind of like shove the phone in their face and like, oh, Mr. Chazz, like sing to you. And like, sure. And some people were like, oh, like that actually really helps my child. And sure, for some people in some moments, right? Context, situation, a lot of things, right? There's a lot of variables there, but like we have to be conscious that that can be taken as like, just calm down, stop your emotion. I'm only validating your feeling so that you get over it and we can do the next thing.
It's non-acceptance and saying, it's like, just fix this problem. I don't really accept you for who you are, right?
Right.
And then it's a manipulative intent. It's not a really authentic intent.
Yes, and I want to like tie it back a little bit to like our experience as adults, because that's sometimes what helps us empathize with children,
thank you.
right?
Please do.
Imagine, you know, you're at work and there's something that you're upset about, something you feel like you're disgruntled about something. Maybe you felt disrespected in a meeting. Maybe you're working longer hours than what was agreed upon. Maybe you're taking on some, more work than what was agreed upon, doing, other people's jobs. And you go in and you're like, hey, you go and you talk to, I have you talk to your leader and say, hey, I have a problem. I want to talk to you, right? And they do like, okay, come into my office. And you're like, okay, let's have this conversation. And then you start sharing about how you're feeling and or that you felt disrespected or whatever the story was. And then they just start reading from their HR sheet of what their response is supposed to be to you. How are you going to feel? You're going to probably be even more PO'd than when you walked in that office, right? Because you really don't actually care. You really just you're just dismissing me in another way. You're just dismissing me in a patronizing way to just keep moving on. You don't actually care. I don't actually feel seen. And I'm probably going to quit, right? Because there's no other, who else do I go to, right? This is what we do here. So just imagine that, right? A lot of times we are that, we see with all the best intentions, we're on social media or listening to podcasts, trying to get information, trying to learn, trying to grow so that we can, provide a better life, a healthier, an emotionally healthier life than maybe what we had growing up, right? And so it's all the good intentions. So we use a script and oh, that is better to say than suck it up. And I didn't have any language for it because it wasn't modeled to me. And so I don't have any language. And so let me use this script. And then you use it and then it just becomes this robotic thing. And I'm not saying scripts are evil or bad and we should never ever use scripts or scripts, but they have their utility, sure, but don't get stuck in the script, right? Use that as a stepping stool. Use the script and build, understand what the script is trying to communicate.
It's the raft to get to the other shore. It's the raft to get to the other shore. It's not the destination.
Yeah. I would say that it is just like an oar.
Yeah, it's not even the raft. I know, as I said that. Yeah. It's like the oar, or it's like the seat in the raft. Right.
It's just a tool to help you. It's not gonna get you there on your own. And by the way, there's no destination. There's no destination. This is the most important part of this whole conversation that we have to have before I get off here.
Yeah.
There is no destination. Perfect doesn't exist. I always say, avoid being a perfectionist, be an improvementist. The goal isn't to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day. So often we will see the Instagram mom, dad, or whatever, family, the pictures, whatever, get them sent the postcards, and we see it, and then it's then we will shame ourselves. And we're not the perfect family, and we'll shame ourselves for where we're at in our journey, not even realizing that curated picture or feed or whatever doesn't even exist. That's not even a representation of their actual reality. It's not, but we're comparing it their perfect curated life to our what we know about the realness of life, right? Of the ups and the downs that they have too, whether they're sharing it or not. But we see that and like, why am I not perfect? And when we mess up, we make a mistake, we shame ourselves. Like, I'm such a bad, insert label here. I'm such a bad parent. I'm such a bad teacher. I'm such a bad mom, dad, such a bad, whatever it is, right? And that actually stops us from improving. That actually slows us from improving. That's like the current against the wrath, right? And instead, we want to move with the current. Instead of it, we want to say like, hey, acknowledge that I did make a mistake. I may be experiencing some guilt. That's okay to feel guilt. The difference between guilt and shame is guilt is like, okay, I feel bad about something I did. Shame is more like, I'm a bad person because of whatever, something I did or whatever the reason is. And so it's okay to feel guilty about like a mistake that we made or messing up. Like, that's a part of it too. Like, that's an emotion. Again, the emotions are information from the body and they're telling us something. And we want to listen to that and sit in it and feel it and be like, yes, I do feel guilty. Like, and let that inspire us to make a change, to do something, improve a little, to make a little improvement the next day, to do something a little different, right? That does take a lot of effort because it takes conscious effort because you're stopping a cycle. You're stopping like, it's almost like stopping a moving train. I don't know if you ever saw that meme, that Spider-Man meme, but like, it takes a lot of effort. So a little bit of improvement and when we shame ourselves, we're stopping ourselves on our track. So avoid being a perfectionist, be an improvementist. The goal is not to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day.
Absolutely. Yes. So true. Yeah. You have permission to be human, dear listener. And I think that's what Chazz is giving you and as well as all this wonderful perspective and advice here. Where can people find you and your wonderful videos, my friend?
Oh man, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all podcasting platforms. And you can also get access to one-on-one coaching with me through www.patreon.com/Mr Chazz. I'm Mr Chazz on pretty much all platforms, and that's Mr Chazz with like two Z's. It's a podcast. You probably see the way my name is spelled, but Mr Chazz with Chazz on TikTok, Mr Chazz space Mr Chazz on Facebook, and Mr Chazz on Instagram.
I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
I want to thank you. Like I said, I mean, for anyone who's a longtime listener of this podcast, you can see all the incredible, why I wanted Mr. Chazz to come on here, because of the way he speaks to the things that we've spoken to for many years in such a wonderful, refreshing way and with a lot of compassion for us as parents. And I think that's, we need that. Kids and parents need a lot of compassion to make those bit by bit changes every day. So thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your voice with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on, and listeners too. Feel free to check out my podcast, Mr. Chazz's Leadership, Parenting, and Teaching Podcast. And I hope this was helpful. I hope it was valuable. And I'll see you on the interwebs.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Janla Van Zant, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.